I tried to quit drinking more times than I can honestly count. And every single time I failed, this voice in my head, it just got louder. It told me I was weak, that I had no willpower, that I was a failure. Each broken promise to myself, each brutal morning after, just added another brick to this crushing mountain of shame. I desperately wanted to quit, but it felt impossible. What nobody had ever explained to me, what I had to find out for myself in the dark, is that this wasn't some kind of moral failing. It was happening in my brain chemistry. My brain was being hijacked, and understanding how that hijacking worked was the only key that could finally unlock the cage I was in. For years, my life was a repeating loop. I'd drink to escape the pressure, then wake up drowning in regret, swearing this time would be different. I'd tell myself, that's it, never again. And I would mean it with every fiber of my being. But then, the afternoon would roll around, and a quiet whisper would start in the back of my mind. An irritation, that feeling that something was just off. By evening, that whisper was a roar, a physical craving so intense it felt like hunger or thirst. It would dominate every single thought, and the memory of all my morning promises would just fade away into the noise. And then I would drink. The first sip would bring this wave of relief, a silencing of that internal chaos. But it was a trap. One drink was never enough, and the cycle would begin again, only this time with more evidence for that voice in my head that I was broken. The worst part? The loneliness. People who cared about me, they just couldn't understand it. They'd ask, with a mix of love and total frustration, "Why don't you just stop?" And how could I explain it? How could I tell them that just stopping felt like trying to hold my breath? It felt like my own mind was working against me. The shame was suffocating. It made me hide, it made me lie, and it made me drink more to numb the shame of drinking. It's a vicious, perfect cycle. And that, my friends, is when I truly believed I was uniquely weak, that everyone else had this off switch that I was just missing. I felt completely and utterly powerless, and I thought that meant I was helpless. My turning point didn't come from some flash of newfound willpower. It came from a book, from a podcast, from a desperate late-night search that finally gave me the one thing I was missing, an explanation. What I learned is that my struggle wasn't happening because I was a bad person. It was happening because of neuroscience. The first piece of the puzzle was a neurotransmitter you've probably heard of: dopamine. Alcohol floods the brain with dopamine, the chemical of pleasure and reward. This creates a powerful feeling of relief and euphoria. But here's the thing. Your brain is incredible. It's an incredible, adaptable machine that loves balance. When it's repeatedly flooded with artificial dopamine from alcohol, it starts to dial down its own natural production. It also gets less sensitive to natural rewards. Suddenly, a good meal, a conversation with a friend, a beautiful sunset, they just don't register the same way. Your brain's reward system gets rewired to believe that alcohol is the main source of comfort and happiness. So, when you're not drinking, your dopamine levels don't just go back to normal, they plummet. That's the irritability, the anxiety, the deep, gnawing dissatisfaction. Those aren't just feelings. They are biological signals from your brain screaming that something is wrong and that it needs alcohol to feel normal again. This, my friends, is the physical root of cravings. It's not a thought you can simply ignore. It's your brain's survival circuitry being hijacked. But it gets deeper. Chronic drinking does more than just mess with your reward system. It actively damages the parts of your brain responsible for good judgment and impulse control, your prefrontal cortex. Think of your prefrontal cortex as the brain's CEO or its brake system. It's the part that says, "Hang on, is this really a good idea? Remember what happened last time?" Alcohol physically impairs this region. So, just as the craving engine, the reward system, is getting stronger and louder, the brake system is getting weaker. You're in a car with the accelerator welded to the floor and the brakes are failing. It's not a lack of willpower, it's compromised hardware. For so many of us, this is layered on top of other things. Many people use alcohol to cope with underlying anxiety, depression, or trauma. It becomes a form of self-medication. The problem? Alcohol actually makes these conditions worse over time, creating a feedback loop where the solution is actively fueling the problem. We now know that specific brain circuits get hyperactive during withdrawal, locking in the brain's association of alcohol with relief from pain. This means we're not just chasing pleasure, we are biologically driven to escape pain. Learning this science was like a key turning in a rusty lock. It was liberating. All those years of self-blame started to fall away. I wasn't weak. I was fighting a biological war inside my own head without the right weapons. This is where the concept of powerlessness, a cornerstone of so many recovery programs, finally clicked for me. For so long, I resisted that word. Powerless sounded like defeat. It sounded like giving up. But I was looking at it all wrong. Admitting powerlessness over alcohol doesn't mean you are a powerless person. It's the opposite. It's a strategic admission. It's looking at that hijacked car with the busted brakes and finally realizing you cannot, through sheer force of will, steer it to safety. It's the act of acknowledging that your old strategy, just trying harder, is guaranteed to fail. Admitting powerlessness is the moment you stop fighting a battle you can't win and start looking for a different way out. It's not an admission of personal weakness. It's an act of profound courage and realism. It's the first, most critical step toward taking your real power back. It's saying, okay, this is a biological condition, not a moral failing. Now, how do I treat the condition? This shift in perspective moves you from shame to action. And if any of this is resonating with you, if you've ever felt that cycle of shame and that feeling of being trapped, I want you to know you're not alone. Pause here. Take a breath. If you feel comfortable, share a piece of your story in the comments. Just acknowledging the struggle is a powerful step. And please, hit the like button. Not for me, but so this video finds the next person who needs to hear this, who's scrolling right now feeling alone. So what comes after that admission? You start building a new strategy. If your brain is rewired for alcohol, the goal becomes to patiently and compassionately rewire it for sobriety. For me, this meant finally asking for help. It meant finding a therapist and a support group, places where I could talk about this without the shame. Now I need to put a serious disclaimer in here. I am not a medical doctor. The early days weren't easy. When you remove alcohol, especially if it was a coping mechanism, everything you were numbing comes roaring to the surface. For some people, stopping suddenly can be physically dangerous, even life-threatening. Please, talk to a doctor or a medical professional to make a safe plan. My sleep was erratic, my anxiety was dangerously high. But because I now understood the science, I didn't see this as a sign that I was failing. I saw it as my brain beginning the long, slow process of healing. I understood my neurotransmitters were trying to rebalance. I learned to identify my triggers, the people, places, and feelings that sent my brain into that craving pattern. And instead of just fighting the craving, I learned to have a plan. Sometimes that meant leaving a situation. Other times it meant calling someone, going for a walk, or just breathing and reminding myself that the craving was a temporary faulty signal from my healing brain. It would pass. Slowly, incredibly slowly at first, things began to change. I started sleeping better. The constant fog of low-grade anxiety began to lift. And the most amazing thing happened. The world started to come back in color. Natural pleasure started to work again. The taste of food, the sound of music, a real laugh with a friend, they started to land again. My brain was healing. The brain has this remarkable capacity for change, for rewiring itself. It's not a quick fix, but it is real. If you're stuck where I was, feeling trapped and ashamed, please hear this. You are not weak. You are not a moral failure, and you are not alone. Your struggle is real, and it is rooted in the complex, powerful, and now understandable science of the brain. The feeling of powerlessness is not a life sentence. It is the key that unlocks the door to a new approach. It's the admission that frees you from the cycle of shame and allows you to seek a new path, one based on understanding, compassion, and support. Quitting drinking wasn't about finally finding some magical reserve of willpower. It was about realizing willpower was never the right tool for the job. It was about learning the truth of what was happening inside my own head, and for the first time, using that knowledge to finally set myself free. And that freedom, my friends, that is real power. Thank you for watching. May God bless you.